Well, from a spectacular garden space, we're going to move on now and talk about trees, tree planting, and what's happened to the trees during this year's historic drought. I'm joined by Guy LeBlanc from Arborvitae Tree Care. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom.
Once again, welcome back to Central Texas Gardener.
Glad to be here.
Let's start by talking about the impact of this amazing weather we've had this year on the trees. What are you seeing out there?
Well, definitely more dieback than I've seen in my entire 30 years here in Austin. All species of trees, even our hardiest natives. A lot of pecans, which generally need a little more water, are dying back quite a bit. But we've seen a lot of live oaks, which are about as drought tolerant a large shade tree as we have also died back. So lots of dieback in many different species.
Well, and obviously the rain has come on the heels of the drought isn't going to solve all those problems. Dieback is dieback. And what's the proper way if a homeowner sees a dead limbs in the tree, they should be removing those limbs, right?
Well, they should make sure first that they are dead, because one way that trees will try to defend themselves against drought is to simply drop their leaves. So the branches may look dead, but they're merely defoliated and dormant. Now that we've gotten some rain, in fact, you can see on some of those types of trees, new leaves have sprouted out just very quickly within days after the rain. So don't be too quick to want to prune these things off. Give them some time, make sure that the branches are indeed dead before they're removed.
Right, and that's a really good tip. Always check to see the branch is viable before making that cut.
Right.
Just because the leaves are gone doesn't mean the tree is.
Exactly, and that's going to be somewhat difficult to ascertain from the ground if you're talking about a really large shade tree, and we're talking about dieback of branches that are 30 or 40 feet up. Even for a professional arborist, that can be hard to assess without actually getting up there and checking the quality of the tissue underneath the bark.
I understand. Now, I know that a lot of folks are looking to replace trees or plant new ones. This is a great time. Fall is the recommended time for tree planting here in Central Texas. And you want to talk about a variety of different species today that people can choose from. There's kind of small, mid, and large range trees. Let's start with the small ones right now and talk about a couple of your current favorites. And it's tree guys, it's really hard to name just a few. I realize that, but there are a couple you wanted to highlight.
Well, I've been becoming more and more a fan of the Oncacho Orchid recently. It's not native to Texas. It's a Bohenia genus, but it's very well adapted to Central Texas. Has beautiful white flowers, which are also one of the most fragrant tree flowers that I'm aware of. Gets about to, maybe 15 feet, 20 feet at most high. It can handle some shade, but really to get that flowering, you're going to want it in full sun, and that's been one of my favorites lately.
It's I have to say I love the Oncacho Orchid tree as well, and for a spring bloomer, and it is one of the spring bloomers. It has a long blooming period. A lot of spring trees, like the redbud, for example, which is a great little tree.
And the fruit trees.
They bloom, but they bloom for 2 weeks if you're lucky.
Right, at most.
And the Oncacho Orchid, though, you get a good month, sometimes a month and a half of the color.
Yeah, it definitely has a longer bloom period than a lot of the fruit trees and the redbuds, etc., and is, I think, much better adapted to our drought than some of those. So a great tree that can handle some shade, but is going to produce the most flowers in the sun.
Right, Oncacho Orchid tree. People should be on the lookout for that. Now, there's an oak that's in the small category, and that doesn't, most people think, small oak? But there is one.
There are actually dozens of varieties of oaks that are very small that we find as we go west from Central Texas to California. But one that is native to this area and is a smallish tree is called the Lacey Oak. And one of the things that's particularly pretty about the Lacey Oak is that the foliage is sort of a bluish green color. And so it definitely is a distinct color difference from your other oaks, and very well adapted, and something that I recommend. It is a tree that needs more sun, though. Many small trees, because they have evolved as understory trees, can handle a fair bit of shade. But the Lacey Oak is going to do best with full sun.
And once about every 5 years, you get the prettiest fall color in the world off a Lacey Oak.
Yes, it does produce great fall color.
You can get these peaches and these kind of scarlet reds. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Right.
Really
Out
love
there
that tree.
at big Lost Maples Park, where the Lacey Oaks and the big tooth maples both grow together,
Right.
we get some of the greatest fall color anywhere in Texas.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time favorite of mine, specifically because it is the oak of the Lost Maples region.
Kind of hard to find, the Lacey Oak, in nurseries, but it's worth looking for.
Yeah, that's a great one. Now, on the mid-size, Arizona Cypress is a favorite of yours. This is another one that you have to look around a little bit for, but it's a good one.
It's becoming more common, and I definitely recommend it as an alternative to some of the other evergreen conifers that people try to plant around here that I don't think do as well. Again, it's not a native, but definitely very well adapted here, and I think more adapted here than, say, the Leyland cypress and even the Italian cypress, which people sometimes use and are much more disease prone. This is a very fast growing conifer, and again, it has this bluish green kind of foliage, and being a conifer, it is evergreen.
Right.
And it makes a nice screening or hedging plant.
Yeah, in a space where you want something to grow tall fast, this is not a bad choice.
It grows amazingly fast. I planted one in my backyard last year that was 4 feet tall. In 1 year, it is now over 10 feet tall.
Yeah. So, and a number of trees in this plant family will surprise you. You think of conifers, you think slow growing, but this is not the case with the Arizona cypress. Another tree in the mid-size range, and these guys can get big, is the chinkapin oak.
Yeah, the mid-size I consider trees from 25 to 50 feet tall.
Yeah.
And Arizona cypress, I've never seen one here in Central Texas anywhere near that. Chinkapins, they can push up against 50 feet. And it's a native to Texas, but we don't see a lot of it here in Austin.
No.
But it is becoming more common. It's a deciduous oak, and it has a large sawtooth edged leaf, so a very pretty leaf, and a very shaggy sort of bark. So it has an interesting character even in winter. And also some nice fall color. It gets a nice golden color to its leaves.
Well, chinkapin is a great one. On the large side, a couple more oaks, bur oak and shumard. Real briefly on these.
Yeah, I think bur oak is one of probably the best large shade tree that we could plant here in Central Texas. It's native from here all the way up to the Dakotas, but very well adapted here. Extremely hardy tree. Being in the white oak family, it's more resistant to oak wilt. Very slow growing for the first couple years, but after a couple years of establishment, will actually grow at a surprisingly good rate of growth. The shumard is also very well adapted here. The important thing to remember about it, though, is that a lot of what is sold as shumard in some nurseries is actually either a hybrid of shumard and some other species, or it was grown in the eastern part of the United States, so it's not as well adapted to our alkaline soil. So if you want a shumard, you should deal with a reputable local nursery and make sure you're dealing with something that's locally grown, or you're very likely to have alkalinity problems with it.
Well, Guy, that's a great list of trees. Now, I want to answer a few questions that people are going to be having out there in Central Texas. With the drought, we've seen a lot of trees die completely, and one big question that we receive here at Central Texas Gardeners: how close can I plant a tree to a stump of one that has died?
I get that question also. If you're wanting to plant, say, within a foot or two of a fairly large tree stump, you're just probably going to have physical difficulty in doing that. And you may also have some issues with, as that stump decomposes, creating some compounds that would not be beneficial for the young roots of a new tree. So my advice is that as long as you're 2 to 3 feet away from a stump a larger size, you'll be completely fine.
Okay, so go at least 3 feet away, you think?
Yeah.
And I'm with you though. I've tried to plant things close to a big stump, and man, it's really hard to dig around those roots.
Yeah. If you really have to have it in that exact location, then you can have the stump ground out by a professional tree service and have all of the grindings removed and replaced with a good quality soil.
Okay, now as I referenced at the beginning of the interview, Guy, this is tree planting time, and we've talked a lot in the past about how to dig the hole and all of that, but other questions people have have to do with use of fertilizer, for example, at the time of planting. A lot of people want those things to grow, and they want to, give it a shot of, fertilizer or root stimulator or something along those lines. What do you recommend?
Current industry standard has been for quite some time now not to apply any type of nutritional supplement such as fertilizers at the time of planting, and generally recommended not to apply those types of things for at least a year. Once you, after a year has passed and you want to apply those types of things, it's really very, very important to be aware of the type of fertilizer you're applying and to use one that's very high quality, which basically means very slow release and very low salt.
Okay, low salt, slow release.
But not at the time of planting.
Okay, so hold off, hold those itchy green thumbs off. And real briefly, people also ask questions about pruning at the time of planting. Some people believe you have to prune.
Yes, for years that was thought to be appropriate, but it's really best not to do any pruning at the time of planting unless you have broken or diseased branches.
Okay, well, those are great tips, Guy, and we do appreciate you coming on board. Guy LeBlanc from Arborvitae Tree Care. Great tips for fall planting and selection of trees. Thank you very much for being on our show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and coming up next is Daphne Richards with Down to Earth.